Picture this: a city where streets curve to channel cool breezes naturally, where buildings are positioned to maximize sunlight in winter and shade in summer, where rainwater flows through hidden channels to nourish gardens and fill reservoirs without a single pump. This isn't some futuristic utopia. It's the reality of ancient urban design, crafted thousands of years ago by civilizations who understood harmony between people and place in ways we're only beginning to rediscover. Today, we're stepping back in time to uncover 29 brilliant urban designs from the past that put many of our modern cities to shame. These weren't just settlements, they were masterpieces of foresight, engineering, and respect for the natural world. And the most astonishing part, their solutions to problems like overcrowding, pollution, and even crime were often simpler, smarter, and far more sustainable than what we've built today. Think about the last time you got stuck in traffic, or walked down a street that felt unsafe, or heard about another city dealing with flooding after a heavy rain. Now imagine a place where none of those problems existed, not because of advanced technology, but because of thoughtful design. That's what ancient engineers and planners achieved. They didn't have computers or cranes, but they had something we've lost: a deep connection to their environment and a willingness to work with it rather than against it. From the wind-cooled alleyways of the Middle East to the earthquake-resistant temples of the Andes, these cities were built to last, to adapt, and to serve the people who called them home. So why did we forget these lessons? How did we end up with concrete jungles that trap heat, waste resources, and leave so many feeling disconnected? That's the mystery we're unraveling today. Because hidden in the ruins and relics of these ancient urban wonders are blueprints for a better way to live, one that balances progress with sustainability, innovation with tradition, and growth with well-being. Whether it's the self-cleaning streets of a 2,000-year-old metropolis or the hidden networks that kept an entire city fed without a single truck, these designs prove that the past might just hold the keys to our future. So let's dive in, because what we're about to discover could change the way you see cities forever. Imagine stepping into a Persian marketplace at midday, where the scorching desert sun makes the air shimmer, yet inside, it feels surprisingly cool. No hum of air conditioners, no blast of artificial chill, just the whisper of wind flowing gracefully through towering structures called wind catchers. These ingenious towers, some reaching nearly 100 feet high, were the ancient world's answer to beating the heat. Designed like natural chimneys, they captured even the faintest breeze, funneling it downward into homes and public buildings. The air would pass over underground water channels, picking up moisture and dropping in temperature before circulating through rooms. It wasn't just clever, it was free, silent, and perfectly in tune with the environment. Meanwhile, halfway across the ancient world, the Romans were mastering their own version of climate control. Their aqueducts did more than deliver drinking water, they transformed public life. In cities like Rome and Pompeii, water flowed through open channels along streets, cooling the air through evaporation. Wealthy villas took it further, embedding pipes within walls to create what we'd now call radiant cooling. The grand baths of Caracalla even used hypocaust systems, raised floors with hollow spaces, to circulate cool air from underground chambers. And let's not forget the simple brilliance of shaded colonnades, where thick stone pillars and overhanging roofs created walkable zones sheltered from the sun. What's striking about these systems isn't just their effectiveness, it's their elegance. Unlike today's energy-guzzling solutions, they worked with nature instead of against it. In Yazd, Iran, wind catchers were angled precisely to catch prevailing winds, while narrow, winding streets created natural wind tunnels. The dense urban layout provided shade, and courtyards with reflective pools amplified cooling. Compare that to modern glass skyscrapers, which trap heat and demand round-the-clock AC. Even Rome's famous Trevi fountain wasn't just decorative, its cascading water lowered the surrounding area's temperature, making it a gathering place during sweltering summers. So why did we abandon these methods? Part of it was the allure of modern technology. Electricity promised control at the flick of a switch. But as temperatures rise and power grids strain, architects are looking back. In places like Dubai, contemporary windcatcher-inspired designs are cutting cooling costs by 40%. And in Spain, researchers are reviving Roman aqueduct principles to cool cities without carbon emissions. The lesson is clear: sometimes the most sustainable solutions aren't new inventions, they're rediscovered wisdom. These ancient engineers didn't just build for their time, they built for eternity. And with cities now battling urban heat islands, their blueprints might be more vital than ever. Here's a city that thrived over 4,500 years ago, where streets stayed spotless without a single garbage truck or sanitation worker sweeping the pavement. Mohenjo-Daro, one of the largest settlements of the ancient Indus Valley civilization, was a masterpiece of urban hygiene, a place where waste seemed to vanish as if by magic. But the secret wasn't magic, it was engineering brilliance. Every street was carefully angled, sloping gently toward covered drains that ran beneath the city. When the rains came, water rushed down these streets, carrying debris straight into the sewers, a self-cleaning system that kept the city pristine. These weren't just simple gutters. The drainage network was a carefully planned underground labyrinth, with brick-lined channels that connected to larger public drains. Each house had its own private bathing area, with wastewater funneled directly into the street's drainage system. Even more impressive, the drains were designed with curved bottoms to prevent blockages, and some had inspection holes for maintenance. Compare that to modern cities where overflowing sewers and littered streets are common complaints. The people of Mohenjo-Daro didn't need landfills or weekly trash collections. They built a city that cleaned itself. But sanitation wasn't their only innovation. The entire urban layout was designed for efficiency and health. Streets were laid out in a precise grid, allowing air to circulate freely and reducing stagnant pockets where disease could spread. Houses were built with thick, insulating walls to keep interiors cool, and many had indoor toilets connected directly to the sewer system, something even some modern cities struggle to provide universally. It's no wonder archaeologists found remarkably few signs of epidemic diseases in the ruins. So how did they manage all this without modern technology? The answer lies in their deep understanding of gravity, water flow, and urban planning. They didn't rely on energy-intensive pumps or complex machinery, just smart design. Every element, from the slope of a street to the placement of a drain, was calculated to work in harmony, and it wasn't just functional, it was durable. These systems lasted centuries, outliving the civilization that built them. Today, as cities grapple with plastic-choked rivers and overwhelmed sewage plants, Mohenjo-Daro's legacy feels more relevant than ever. Imagine if modern urban planners took a page from their playbook: fewer waste trucks idling in traffic, fewer flooded streets after heavy rains, less pollution seeping into waterways. The ancients proved that sustainability isn't about how advanced your tools are, but how well you understand the problem. And in Mohenjo-Daro, they solved it with nothing more than clay bricks, careful geometry, and foresight. A reminder that sometimes the oldest ideas are the most revolutionary. deep in the rose-red cliffs of Jordan's desert, an ancient city thrived where survival should have been impossible. Petra, the jewel of the Nabatean civilization, didn't just endure in one of the world's harshest climates. It flourished, supporting tens of thousands of people in what looks like a barren wasteland. Their secret, a water network so advanced it puts modern desert cities to shame. While today's metropolises drill deeper wells and build costly desalination plants, the Nabateans turned their entire city into a giant rainwater harvester, capturing every precious drop that fell from the sky. Their system began high above the city, where skilled engineers carved channels into cliff faces to intercept runoff before it could vanish into the dry earth. These channels fed into a labyrinth of terracotta pipes, some no wider than a grapefruit, snaking down mountainsides with precision gradients to maintain steady flow. But here's the stroke of genius: they lined these pipes with a natural waterproofing agent, lime mortar mixed with crushed ceramics, creating a seal so effective it still repels water after 2,000 years. And when flash floods threatened, diversion dams redirected torrents into massive underground cisterns, some large enough to hold a year's water supply for entire neighborhoods. What's truly remarkable is how they balanced scarcity with abundance. In a place where rain might only fall a handful of times a year, they engineered resilience. Their gardens and vineyards weren't watered by chance. Each plant received moisture through a drip irrigation system using porous clay vessels buried near roots, a method that wasted nothing. Even their famous treasury building, carved into rock, had hidden water channels that collected condensation from cool night air, funneling it into storage. This wasn't just survival, it was mastery. Modern hydrologists studying Petra have made startling discoveries. The Nabateans understood something we're only now relearning: that water conservation isn't just about storage, it's about slowing down the journey of every molecule. Their systems mimicked natural watersheds, allowing water to seep gradually into the landscape rather than rushing away. Compare that to today's concrete-covered cities, where rain hits pavement and vanishes into storm drains within minutes. As climate change turns more regions arid, Petra's lessons are gaining urgent relevance. In Arizona, architects are testing Nabatean-inspired terracotta cooling systems to reduce evaporation. In Australia, farmers are reviving ancient subsurface irrigation to grow crops with 90% less water. The Nabateans proved that even in the driest places, scarcity is a design problem, not an inevitability. Their city didn't just endure the desert, it danced with it, turning constraints into innovations that echo across millennia. On the island of Crete, where the earth shakes with terrifying frequency, stands one of history's greatest architectural puzzles, the Palace of Knossos. Built over 3,500 years ago by the Minoans, this sprawling complex didn't just survive occasional tremors, it withstood centuries of violent earthquakes that would level modern buildings. Their secret, a radical approach to construction that embraced flexibility over rigidity, a lesson we're still catching up to today. At first glance, the Minoan technique seems counterintuitive. While modern engineers often rely on reinforced concrete to resist seismic forces, the builders of Knossos did the opposite. They crafted wooden frames that could sway and bend during quakes, acting like shock absorbers for the entire structure. These frames weren't just haphazard, they were meticulously designed with interlocking joints that allowed movement without collapse. Even the foundation stones were placed strategically, resting on layers of soft clay that absorbed and dispersed energy rather than fighting it. The result, a palace that danced with the earth instead of resisting it, surviving quakes that toppled stiffer, stronger buildings around it. But the innovations didn't stop there. The Minoans understood something modern builders often forget, that uniformity can be a weakness. Their walls varied in thickness, with thicker sections at critical load points and lighter partitions elsewhere. This created a natural balance, preventing stress from concentrating in any single area. They even used ashlar masonry, carefully cut stones fitted together without mortar, which allowed walls to shift slightly during tremors before settling back into place. Compare that to today's rigid high-rises where a single crack in concrete can spell disaster. So why haven't these ancient techniques become standard in earthquake zones? Part of the answer lies in cost and convenience. Modern construction favors speed and uniformity, materials like steel and concrete that can be mass-produced. Timber framing requires skilled craftsmanship, and flexible foundations demand site-specific adjustments, things that don't always fit neatly into contemporary development models. But the tide may be turning. In Japan, where seismic activity is constant, architects are revisiting Minoan principles, constructing high rises with base isolators that mimic ancient flexible foundations. Even in California, engineers are testing wooden rocking frames inspired by Knossos' design. The Minoans didn't have supercomputers or seismic sensors, but they had something equally powerful: observation. They built not to dominate nature, but to collaborate with it. Their structures weren't just buildings, they were dialogues with the Earth itself. And as climate change increases geological instability worldwide, that dialogue might be the most important one we relearn. After all, the Palace of Knossos still stands after millennia of shaking. How many of our cities can say the same? High above the Valley of Mexico, where the morning sun paints the mountains gold, lies a city frozen in time, Teotihuacan. Its massive Avenue of the Dead doesn't just connect pyramids, it traces the path of the sun itself. Every structure in this ancient metropolis, from the towering Pyramid of the Sun to the humblest residential compound, was meticulously placed to harness celestial rhythms. The entire urban grid aligns precisely 15.5 degrees east of true north, a deliberate angle that synchronized the city with both the solar cycle and sacred cosmological beliefs. Walk its streets during the spring equinox, and you'll witness shadows vanishing at noon as the sun stands perfectly overhead, a living calendar carved in stone and sunlight. This wasn't just symbolic, it was profoundly practical. Buildings were spaced and angled to create natural thermal regulation. Narrow streets funneled cool morning breezes into plazas, while wide avenues allowed winter sunlight to penetrate deep into the city, warming stone surfaces that radiated heat long after sunset. The Pyramid of the Sun's western staircase aligns so precisely with the setting sun on specific dates that it appears to set directly down the steps, a spectacle that still draws crowds today. But beyond the awe, there's genius. Structures were positioned to maximize solar gain in winter while providing shade during summer's peak heat, reducing the need for artificial heating or cooling. Modern architects studying Teotihuacan have made a startling discovery. The city's layout corresponds to what we now call solar envelopes, three-dimensional models that map how sunlight interacts with buildings at different times of year. The ancient planners essentially created a low-carbon heating and cooling system using nothing but geometry and observation. Compare that to today's urban sprawl, where glass towers create wind tunnels and concrete absorbs heat like an oven. Even something as simple as street orientation matters. Research shows properly aligned modern neighborhoods can reduce winter heating needs by up to 20%. What's most striking is how seamlessly Teotihuacan blended science and spirituality. Solar alignments marked agricultural cycles and religious ceremonies alike, turning urban planning into a sacred act. The city's builders understood something we often forget: that efficiency and meaning aren't opposites. Their streets weren't just pathways, they were equations written in sunlight, connecting daily life to cosmic order. As cities today grapple with energy crises and heat islands, Teotihuacan's solar wisdom begs revisiting. In Barcelona, superblocks designed for optimal sunlight exposure have reduced energy use by 30%. In China, entire eco-cities now follow solar orientation principles inspired by ancient Mesoamerica. The lesson isn't about copying pyramids, it's about recognizing that every street, every building, exists within a relationship to the sun. Teotihuacan didn't just build a city, it choreographed a dance with daylight, proving that the most sustainable solutions often come from looking up rather than digging deeper. Long before rising seas threatened its future, Venice stood as a triumph of human ingenuity over nature's challenges, not by conquering water, but by embracing it. The city's founders didn't just build on a lagoon, they engineered an entire ecosystem to thrive within it. Imagine driving wooden piles, over 10 million of them, into the soft silt beneath the waves, not to anchor buildings rigidly, but to create flexible foundations that could sway with tides like reeds in a stream. These weren't ordinary timbers, they were alder trunks chosen for their resistance to rot in salt water, hammered deep until they reached the solid clay beneath. On this submerged forest, they laid platforms of Istrian stone, a dense limestone that repels erosion. The result, structures that floated on waterlogged soil, rising and falling with seasonal floods without cracking apart. But the real genius lay in the lagoon itself. Early Venetians transformed this brackish wetland into a natural flood barrier. They dredged canals to direct tidal flows, creating a circulatory system that flushed silt out to sea and kept waterways clear. They built artificial islands as wave breaks and planted dense marshes along the edges to absorb storm surges. Even the city's iconic gondola design reflects this harmony: flat bottoms to navigate shallow waters, asymmetrical hulls to maneuver tight canals. Venice wasn't fighting the Adriatic, it was dancing with it, using hydrology as both shield and sustenance. Compare this to modern coastal cities that rely on rigid seawalls and pumps. When Venice faced aqua-all to high water, its porous paving stones let floodwaters drain naturally as tides receded, while raised walkways kept life moving. Today's solutions often create new problems. Concrete barriers disrupt marine ecosystems and can worsen erosion elsewhere. Meanwhile, Venice's original systems worked for centuries without electricity or fossil fuels. The lagoon's salt marshes weren't just buffers, they filtered pollutants, nurtured fish stocks, and even provided salt for trade, turning adaptation into economic advantage. So what changed? Industrialization altered the balance. Deepening channels for large ships allowed stronger tides to penetrate. Groundwater extraction caused subsidence. The very innovations meant to modernize Venice undermined its ancient safeguards. Now, as cities from Miami to Jakarta face similar threats, some are looking back to the Serenissimo's playbook. In the Netherlands, architects are building amphibious homes on floating foundations inspired by Venetian pilings. In Bangladesh, reviving mangrove forests, nature's version of Venice's salt marshes, has proven more effective than concrete barriers at stopping cyclones. Venice's original designers understood a truth we're relearning. Resilience isn't about rigidity. It's about flexibility, about systems that absorb shocks rather than resist them. Their city wasn't perfect, but for 1,000 years it proved that living with water isn't a paradox. It's a possibility if we're willing to listen to the whispers of the lagoon. Beneath the towering cliffs of Norway's fjords, Viking longhouses wore crowns of green, not just as decoration, but as survival. These sod roofs, thick with grass, wildflowers, and even small shrubs, were far more than rustic charm. They were a masterclass in passive climate control, turning harsh Scandinavian winters into manageable warmth and brutal summer sun into cool refuge. Layer by layer, Viking builders crafted these living roofs, birch bark for waterproofing, then turf cut from nearby meadows, its dense root systems knitting together like natural rebar. The result, insulation so effective that even when snow buried the landscape, interiors stayed warm enough for feasts and storytelling around the hearth. But warmth was just the beginning. These roofs acted like giant sponges, absorbing up to 90% of rainfall, slowing its rush to the ground, preventing erosion, and replenishing groundwater naturally. In heavy storms, modern roofs send torrents of water gushing into overwhelmed drains, but Viking roofs released moisture gradually, their plants filtering impurities along the way. Some settlements took it further, cultivating hardy vegetables and medicinal herbs right atop their homes, turning wasted space into microfarms. The roofs weren't separate from the ecosystem. They became part of it, attracting pollinators and blending dwellings seamlessly into the terrain, a camouflage against both rival clans and harsh winds. So why did this 1,000-year-old solution vanish from most modern cities? The Industrial Revolution brought cheaper, faster materials: slate, tile, asphalt, that promised permanence but traded away adaptability. Factory-made roofs required no local knowledge, no relationship to the land. Yet the trade-offs were steep. Traditional sod roofs lasted 50 years or more with minimal upkeep, while many modern roofs need replacing in half that time. They also created urban heat islands, whereas Viking roofs cooled the air around them through evaporation, much like a forest floor. Today, as cities battle flooding and overheating, Scandinavia's ancient wisdom is resurfacing. In Oslo, government buildings now sport sod roofs to reduce stormwater runoff. Chicago's City Hall wears a lush green crown that lowers summer temperatures by up to 30 degrees compared to nearby asphalt roofs. Engineers have even improved on Viking designs, adding lightweight soil blends and drought-resistant plants for contemporary climates. The Vikings didn't have climate science, but they understood balance, that a roof shouldn't just shelter people from the environment, but collaborate with it. Their legacy whispers a question: what if every urban rooftop could be more than dead space, but a living, breathing layer of our city's ecosystems? Perched on a hill in southern France, the medieval fortress of Carcassonne didn't just defy invaders, it played with them. Two massive concentric walls, separated by a death trap called the lists, forced attackers into a narrow killing zone where archers could rain arrows from 3 levels of battlements. But here's what's truly remarkable. This ironclad defense wasn't achieved by sealing people away in darkness. Instead, the city thrived with bustling markets, open plazas, and even vineyards within its walls. The secret lay in a design philosophy modern security experts call natural surveillance, where every alley, gateway, and tower was positioned to maximize visibility, creating a city that felt welcoming yet was virtually impossible to conquer. Take the placement of those iconic 52 towers. They weren't spaced evenly like boring checkpoints. Each one was angled to provide overlapping fields of vision, eliminating blind spots where enemies could gather unseen. The outer wall stood deliberately low, so defenders on the inner wall could fire over their comrades' heads. Even the main gates were masterstrokes of psychological warfare. Angled entrances forced attackers to expose their unshielded sides while navigating a maze of portcullises and murder holes. Yet for residents, these same features created a sense of safety. A baker could spot strangers from his shop window. Children played in courtyards visible from multiple guard posts, and the open design meant no shadowy corners where trouble could fester unseen. Compare this to modern urban security, where we often default to barricades and cameras. Gated communities create isolation, and blank-walled buildings breed anonymity. Carcassonne proves safety doesn't require sacrificing community. In fact, its design strengthened social bonds. The shared responsibility of defense forged trust among neighbors, while the intelligent layout meant people naturally kept watch over one another's homes. It wasn't just walls that protected the city, it was the 1,000 daily interactions of people who knew their vigilance mattered. Today's architects are taking notes. In Amsterdam, the Borneo-Sporenburg neighborhood uses raised stoops and shared gardens to recreate that casual watchfulness. Tokyo's alley networks employ subtle curves that maintain sight lines without feeling oppressive. The lesson isn't about rebuilding castles, it's about designing spaces where safety emerges from how people interact with their environment. Carcassonne's walls still stand after 8 centuries, not just as stone relics, but as proof that the best defense isn't a barrier. It's a community woven into the very fabric of a city's design. Walk through the streets of ancient Rome, and you wouldn't find overflowing garbage bins or mountains of landfill. Instead, you'd stumble upon something remarkable, a city that turned its waste into wealth. The Romans didn't just dispose of trash, they engineered it into an invisible power grid. Take the Cloaca Maxima, their legendary sewer system. While it famously carried wastewater, its lesser-known role was as a conduit for methane gas harvested from decomposing organic matter. This gas wasn't wasted, it fueled the hypocaust systems beneath public baths, heating water and floors without a single coal furnace. But that was just one thread in a much larger tapestry of sustainability. Every morning, carts rolled through neighborhoods collecting food scraps, not for dumping, but for delivery to urban horti, the rooftop and courtyard gardens that supplied fresh produce to the city. These gardens thrived on compost made from household waste, creating a closed-loop system where yesterday's apple cores became tomorrow's harvest. Even human waste had value. Fullers, the ancient equivalent of dry cleaners, used aged urine collected from public latrines as a natural detergent for scrubbing woolen togas. Nothing was considered garbage. Everything had a next act. The brilliance of this system lay in its simplicity. Unlike modern waste management, which relies on energy-intensive recycling plants and sprawling landfills, Rome's approach required no advanced technology, just meticulous organization and a cultural mindset that saw resources where we see refuse. Case in point, the Sterquilinia designated composting sites outside the city walls, where farmers lined up to collect nutrient-rich waste for their fields. This wasn't just recycling, it was a thriving circular economy that supported agriculture, reduced transportation costs, and kept streets clean. So why did these practices fade? The fall of Rome certainly disrupted systems, but the deeper shift was philosophical. The Industrial Revolution reframed waste as something to be removed rather than reused out of sight, out of mind. Cheap fossil fuels made it easier to burn or bury trash than to repurpose it. Yet today, as landfills choke and carbon emissions soar, cities are relearning Rome's lessons. In Sweden, waste-to-energy plants now power nearly 1 million homes, mimicking the hypocaust principle. Urban farms from Detroit to Singapore are reviving compost networks reminiscent of the horti. The Romans proved that sustainability isn't about inventing new solutions, it's about seeing the potential in what we already have. Their city didn't just manage waste, it honored it, transforming what others discarded into the very energy that fueled their civilization. In an age of disposable everything, that's a legacy worth rediscovering. High in the Andean clouds, where thin air makes every step an effort, lies a city that mastered the art of walking. Machu Picchu's stone pathways don't just climb mountains, they tell a story of urban design where every inch was crafted for human connection. Without a single wheel rut or carriage road, this 15th century marvel functioned as a pedestrian's paradise, its terraced streets weaving together homes, temples, and plazas into a seamless tapestry. The Incas didn't just lack cars, they built a civilization that proved them unnecessary. The genius lies in the details. Each stair was cut to match the natural stride of an adult, with varying heights adjusted for steepness to reduce fatigue. Pathways widened at scenic overlooks, inviting pause and conversation, while narrow alleys between buildings created cool microclimates perfect for midday shade. Without vehicles to accommodate, plazas could be intimate rather than sprawling, fostering impromptu gatherings. Even the famous agricultural terraces doubled as social infrastructure. Farmers tending crops on different levels could chat across the gaps, turning work into community. This wasn't just a city without cars, it was a city designed for the rhythm of human movement. Compare that to modern streets, where sidewalks feel like afterthoughts squeezed between roaring traffic. Machu Picchu's designers understood something we've forgotten, that how people move through space shapes how they interact. Without honking horns or exhaust fumes, conversations flourished. The absence of wheeled transport meant goods traveled by llama or human porter, keeping commerce local and small-scale. No Walmart trucks, but also no traffic jams or delivery drones. The entire city hummed at 3 miles per hour, the speed of a leisurely walk. The environmental benefits were profound. No asphalt meant rainwater could seep naturally into the ground, replenishing aquifers instead of racing into storm drains. The compact layout minimized deforestation, with buildings clustered to preserve surrounding forests. And because every journey was on foot, the air stayed crisp and clean, a stark contrast to today's urban smog. Modern studies of car-free zones in cities like Venice and Copenhagen echo these findings. Pedestrian areas see drastic drops in noise pollution and emissions while boosting local business revenue. So what stops us from embracing this model? Partly, its scale. Machu Picchu housed perhaps 1,000 residents, not millions, but the principles translate. Barcelona's Superblocks initiative reclaims streets from cars, creating walkable mini-districts with playgrounds and greenery where intersections once stood. In Oslo, the removal of parking spaces downtown increased foot traffic to shops by 10%. The Incas' legacy suggests that going car-free isn't about sacrifice. It's about redesigning spaces to prioritize what actually makes cities livable: clean air, chance encounters, and the freedom to stroll without looking both ways. Perhaps the most radical lesson lies in the terraces themselves. By building vertically rather than spreading outward, Machu Picchu achieved density without crowding, a reminder that cities can grow up rather than out. Those stone steps didn't just lead to temples, they climbed toward a vision of urban life where mobility meant 2 feet and a heartbeat, where every path was an invitation to slow down and see your neighbor's face. In an age of rush-hour gridlock, that vision feels less like ancient history and more like a roadmap forward. In the heart of ancient Thebes, where bustling markets and crowded temples filled the air with constant chatter, the Egyptians engineered an unexpected luxury silence. Their solution wasn't to demand quieter neighbors or retreat to the desert, but to build walls that literally swallowed sound. These weren't just thick barriers of stone, they were precision instruments of tranquility, angled slightly inward to deflect noise upward and away from living spaces. Layer upon layer of mud brick, mixed with straw for elasticity, absorbed vibrations like a sponge, while strategically placed gardens between buildings added a living buffer of rustling reeds and palm fronds to further diffuse urban clamor. The result, homes where priests could study, scribes could work, and families could rest, even in one of the ancient world's most populous cities. What's fascinating is how they tailored these techniques to different noise sources. Near the lively pottery district, walls were built with hollow cavities filled with sand, an ancient version of acoustic insulation that trapped sound waves midair. Along processional routes, colonnades broke up echoes before they could reach residential areas, much like modern sound baffles in concert halls. Even their choice of building materials played a role. Limestone facades reflected high-frequency noises like hammering, while softer sandstone absorbed the low rumble of cartwheels. This wasn't guesswork, it was applied physics, honed over generations of observing how sound traveled through their city. Modern noise pollution studies reveal just how ahead of their time the Thebans were. Today's urban planners fight decibel wars with rubberized asphalt and double-paned windows, yet the average city dweller still endures noise levels linked to chronic stress and sleep disorders. Compare that to an Egyptian noble's villa where inner courtyards acted as sound wells, channeling breezes but blocking street noise through careful alignment. Their theaters took it further. The very steps audiences sat on were designed to amplify performers' voices while dampening crowd murmur, a feat modern acousticians replicate with digital modeling. The lesson here isn't about copying mudbrick recipes. It's about rethinking our approach to noise as a design challenge rather than an inevitability. In Seoul, architects are testing sound gardens inspired by Thebes' vegetative buffers, using bamboo clusters to reduce traffic noise by 11 decibels. Copenhagen's newest apartments feature undulating facades that scatter sound waves much like those angled Egyptian walls. Even something as simple as balcony railings filled with plants, an idea straight from Theban rooftops, can cut high-rise noise transmission by half. The ancient Egyptians didn't have microphones or decibel meters, but they understood something we often forget. Silence isn't the absence of sound, but the presence of thoughtful design. In a world where urban noise is the second largest environmental health risk after air pollution, their walls whisper a promise that cities don't have to choose between vibrancy and peace. They just have to build with both in mind. The legend of Babylon's Hanging Gardens paints a picture of lush terraces cascading down ziggurat walls, but beneath the myth lies something far more revolutionary. A blueprint for vertical farming written 2,600 years ago. While historians debate whether the gardens were real or poetic exaggeration, their imagined design reveals staggering agricultural ingenuity. Picture tiered platforms built from baked brick and asphalt, each level hosting not just ornamental plants, but functional crops, grains, vegetables, even fruit trees, all fed by an intricate pulley system that lifted water from the Euphrates to the highest terraces. This wasn't just a royal vanity project, it was an ancient answer to urban food security, stacking harvests skyward where land was scarce. What made the gardens revolutionary wasn't their beauty, but their efficiency. Babylon's architects understood that farming vertically could multiply yield without expanding horizontally. Vines trailed down walls to cool lower levels, their leaves reducing evaporation. Shallow-rooted plants grew above deep-rooted trees, maximizing soil use. Every drop of water did double duty, trickling from higher terraces to irrigate those below, a closed-loop system centuries before hydroponics. Modern urban farms from Singapore to Brooklyn are now proving the Babylonians right. A single acre of vertical farming can produce the equivalent of 10 traditional acres, with 95% less water. The difference: today's farms rely on electric pumps and LED lights, while the hanging gardens ran on gravity and sunlight. But the real lesson isn't about technology, it's about integration. Babylon's gardens weren't isolated agricultural hubs, they were woven into the city's fabric. herbs grown on upper terraces flavored palace kitchens, while surplus harvests likely fed nearby markets. Waste became compost, restarting the cycle. Compare that to today's urban farms, often siloed on rooftops or in warehouses, disconnected from the communities they serve. Some forward-thinking cities are bridging this gap. In Tokyo, metro stations host vertical lettuce farms where commuters pick dinner on their way home. Paris has turned historic courtyards into communal food forests, echoing Babylon's blending of beauty and utility. The hanging gardens also solved a problem modern cities still grapple with: food miles. Babylon, like today's megacities, couldn't afford to dedicate vast tracts of land to agriculture within its walls. By stacking production vertically, they slashed the distance between farm and table, ensuring fresh produce even during sieges or droughts. Contemporary studies show that urban vertical farming could reduce food transport emissions by up to 75%. The twist: Babylon achieved this without fossil fuels, relying instead on human-engineered water screws and shade-loving crop varieties bred for microclimates. Perhaps most inspiring is how the gardens turned constraints into creativity. Limited space forced innovation upward. Arid conditions birthed water-saving techniques. Even the choice of plants, figs, pomegranates, and drought-resistant palms reflected deep ecological wisdom. Modern urban farmers are rediscovering this mindset. In Dubai's scorching heat, engineers have developed waffle gardens, inspired by Babylonian terraces, that reduce water use by 80%. Detroit's vacant lots now host pyramid-shaped growing towers that mimic ziggurat geometry to optimize sun exposure. The hanging gardens remind us that urban farming's future might lie in its past, not in replicating ancient blueprints, but in reviving their philosophy. That food production shouldn't sprawl outward but climb upward. That cities needn't choose between density and self-sufficiency. And that sometimes the most sustainable solutions aren't forged in laboratories, but whispered through millennia by brick terraces dripping with orchids and wheat. Rising from the Yemeni desert like a mirage, the 16-story towers of Shibam defy every assumption about mud architecture. While modern skyscrapers rely on steel and concrete, these 500-year-old high-rises stand tall thanks to an ingenious recipe: sun-dried mud bricks reinforced with straw, coated in a plaster made from lime and volcanic ash. The result: structures that not only withstand centuries of scorching heat, but actively resist the flames that routinely gut contemporary buildings. When fire races through a city today, it feeds on synthetic materials, plastic insulation, vinyl siding, engineered wood releasing toxic fumes and spreading at terrifying speeds. Shibam's towers present the opposite scenario. Their thick earthen walls char slowly without collapsing, while their natural plasters form a protective crust that actually smothers flames. It's a fireproofing system so effective that even direct torch tests leave only superficial marks. The secret lies in the chemistry of traditional building. Modern construction often prioritizes lightweight, cheap materials that burn hot and fast. Shibam's builders worked with physics instead of against it. Their mud bricks, compacted with precise clay-to-sand ratios, conduct heat so poorly that flames struggle to penetrate deeper layers. The straw fibers aren't just binder, they create microscopic air pockets that insulate like ceramic tiles. Even the decorative gypsum window screens serve a purpose. Their high water content draws heat away from openings. This wasn't accidental fire resistance. It was intentional design honed over generations in a climate where both wildfires and cooking accidents were constant threats. Compare this to today's fire-prone suburbs, where houses built with OSB sheathing and plastic vapor barriers can become fully engulfed in minutes. The difference isn't just about survival rates, it's about toxicity. When a modern home burns, it releases cyanide from melted carpets, hydrochloric acid from PVC pipes, and carcinogens from burning insulation. Shibam's worst-case scenario. Walls returned to inert clay and sand, the same substances found naturally in riverbeds. After a fire, the buildings could literally be repaired with materials from their own rubble. No hazardous waste, no landfill burden, just earth returning to earth. So why did we abandon these methods? The Industrial Revolution shifted priorities towards speed and standardization. Mud construction requires local knowledge and seasonal timing. Bricks need weeks to cure in specific weather conditions. Concrete promises instant results, albeit with hidden costs like the 2.8 billion tons of CO2 emitted annually during its production. Yet the tide may be turning. Architects in California's fire zones are now blending Shibam's principles with modern engineering, creating rammed earth walls that outperform concrete in wildfire tests. In Germany, researchers have developed fireproof plasters using clay and hemp fibers that mimic Yemeni formulas but meet contemporary building codes. Shibam's legacy isn't just about nostalgia for traditional techniques, it's a provocation. In an era of climate-driven wildfires, shouldn't our buildings protect us rather than accelerate disaster? Those desert towers still standing after 5 centuries suggest that the safest future might not lie in newer materials, but in wiser ones. Where we see primitive mud, they saw a sophisticated partnership between human shelter and elemental forces, a reminder that sometimes the most advanced solution is the one that's been under our feet all along. In the sun-baked streets of Timgad, a Roman city carved into the edge of the Sahara, water wasn't a luxury, it was a birthright. Every neighborhood, from the grandest colonnaded avenues to the humblest alleyways, had its own public fountain, each fed by a meticulously maintained aqueduct system that brought fresh mountain springs directly to the people. These weren't just functional spigots, they were architectural jewels adorned with carvings of nymphs and gods, turning every drink of water into a small celebration of communal life. The message was clear: in this city, no one would thirst regardless of wealth or status. What set Timgad apart was its radical egalitarianism. Unlike Roman cities where wealthy homes had private piped water, here even the grandest villas drew from the same public sources as laborers. The fountains were spaced precisely 500 paces apart, a deliberate calculation ensuring no resident walked more than 2 minutes to reach clean water. Engineers designed the system with overflow channels that automatically diverted excess to public baths and gardens, eliminating waste. This wasn't just engineering brilliance, it was a political statement in stone and water, declaring that survival resources should never be hoarded. Fast forward to today, where 2,000 years of progress have left millions rationing water from privatized utilities. In cities like Cape Town and Chennai, taps run dry while bottled water companies drain aquifers for profit. Timgad's model poses an uncomfortable question. Why did an ancient desert outpost manage what modern megacities cannot? The answer lies in priorities. Roman law treated water as a res communis, a thing belonging to all people, like air or sunlight. Maintenance was funded through public coffers, not user fees, with elected officials personally liable for keeping flows uninterrupted. Modern solutions are quietly echoing this ancient wisdom. In Barcelona, a citizen-led initiative revived Roman-style public fountains, installing over 1,600 free drinking stations to combat heat waves. In Bolivia, mass protests reclaimed water rights from corporations, inspired by pre-colonial communal systems. Even in drought-stricken California, some towns are experimenting with water commons models where residents collectively manage local springs, just as Timgad's neighborhoods once did. The lesson isn't about copying stone fountains, it's about rejecting the idea that life's essentials must be monetized. Timgad thrived in a harsher climate than most modern cities face, yet it never treated water as a commodity. Its engineers understood something we've forgotten, that true sustainability isn't just technical, it's social. When a city's design reminds every citizen with each sip of water that they belong to something larger than themselves, it builds more than infrastructure, it builds civilization. In the heart of the Syrian desert, where summer temperatures routinely scorch past 115 degrees, the ancient city of Palmyra offered pedestrians an oasis of coolness without a single watt of electricity. Its architects mastered a simple but profound trick. They turned shadows into infrastructure. Mile after mile of covered walkways stretched through the city, their colonnades spaced with mathematical precision to block direct sunlight while allowing just enough angled light to illuminate the path. These weren't just aesthetic flourishes, they were precision instruments of thermal regulation, turning deadly heat into manageable warmth through pure geometry. The genius lay in the details. Each column's thickness and spacing was calibrated to the sun's arc, with wider gaps near buildings to funnel breezes inward. The walkway's barrel-vaulted ceilings trapped pockets of cooler air beneath them, while the stone itself, local limestone mixed with gypsum, had a high thermal mass that absorbed heat during the day and radiated it back at night. Even the color scheme played a role. Light-colored plaster reflected sunlight, keeping surfaces up to 30 degrees cooler than nearby exposed ground. This wasn't just shade, it was a microclimate engineered into the urban fabric. Compare this to modern sidewalks, where concrete slabs bake under relentless sun, radiating heat back at pedestrians like griddles. Contemporary solutions default to energy-intensive fixes, mist machines, shade sails that require constant maintenance, or worse, air-conditioned shopping malls that lure people indoors. Palmyra's architects faced the same brutal climate with nothing but stone and foresight. Their shaded avenues didn't just protect individuals, they cooled entire neighborhoods. Studies show tree-lined streets in cities like Phoenix can reduce ambient temperatures by up to 15 degrees. Imagine the impact of Palmyra's interconnected shadow network across a whole city. What's startling is how these ancient principles are resurfacing in cutting-edge designs. In Singapore's Marina Bay district, architects have created urban canyons, with building overhangs modeled after Palmyra's colonnades, reducing air conditioning demand by 40%. Barcelona's superblocks incorporate similar shading techniques using pergolas draped with drought-resistant vines. Even simple adjustments like angling bus shelters or aligning streets to maximize morning shade can make scorching cities more livable. The deeper lesson from Palmyra isn't about replicating stone columns. It's about rethinking shade as a public utility rather than an afterthought. When modern zoning codes mandate sidewalk widths but ignore shade coverage, we prioritize cars over human comfort. Palmyra's walkways remind us that urban design isn't just about moving people from point A to B. It's about making that journey bearable, even delightful in any weather. As climate change turns city streets into heat traps, those 2,000-year-old shadows stretching across the desert stone whisper a challenge. Why should seeking refuge from the sun be a luxury? Palmyra proved that with thoughtful design, cool passage could be every pedestrian's right, a gift of respite carved not in policy documents, but in the very bones of the city. Far from the concrete jungles of today's megacities, ancient Kyoto unfolded like a living tapestry where cherry blossoms and wildlife were as much a part of the urban fabric as tea houses and temples. The city's planners wove an intricate network of green corridors not as afterthoughts, but as vital arteries connecting forested mountains to river valleys right through the heart of human settlement. These weren't just pretty walkways, They were engineered habitats where deer could follow ancestral migration paths, where foxes could hunt rodents along stream banks, and where fireflies still lit up summer nights, all within steps of bustling markets and silk workshops. The sophistication of Kyoto's design lay in its layered functionality. Cedar-lined canals doubled as wildlife highways, their gently sloping banks allowing animals to drink safely without getting trapped. Temple gardens acted as stepping stones for birds and pollinators, while deliberately unlit sections of streets preserved nocturnal creatures' natural rhythms. Even the famous bamboo groves served a purpose beyond beauty. Their dense stands muffled urban noise, creating acoustic buffers where animals could thrive. This wasn't accidental coexistence. It was a masterclass in designing cities as ecosystems rather than opposing nature. Modern ecology confirms just how visionary this approach was. Studies show Kyoto's medieval wildlife corridors maintained genetic diversity among urban animal populations at levels comparable to undisturbed forests. Compare that to today's fragmented cities where a squirrel might need to dodge 6 lanes of traffic just to reach another patch of trees. The ancient capital achieved what contemporary conservationists strive for: permeable urbanism that lets life flow freely. Current cities are taking notes. Singapore's Nature Ways program mimics Kyoto's corridors with tree-lined routes that guide birds and butterflies through high-rise districts. In Berlin, wild boars now follow replanted hedgerow tunnels to reach urban parks without invading streets. Even small interventions like Toronto's wildlife bridges over highways or Melbourne's artificial creek systems prove that animals will use safe passages if we build them. The key insight from Kyoto: coexistence doesn't mean keeping nature out there. It means inviting wildlife in on terms that work for all species. What made Kyoto's system truly revolutionary was its recognition that human prosperity depended on thriving ecosystems. By protecting herons that kept fish populations balanced or maintaining owl habitats that controlled rodents, the city created natural pest control far more effective than modern pesticides. Their tea farmers knew blossoms needed native bees to pollinate them, so they left wild patches between fields. This reciprocal relationship challenges our modern notion that development requires conquering wilderness. As expanding cities today push thousands of species toward extinction, Kyoto's ancient lanes whisper an alternative. Imagine a metropolis where green roofs form aerial pathways for migrating butterflies, where stormwater ponds double as frog sanctuaries, where every neighborhood has a stake in protecting its non-human residents. The old capital proved that the line between urban and wild isn't a wall, it's a bridge, carefully tended by those who understand that a city's true wealth isn't just in its buildings, but in the life it sustains. Buried beneath the Anatolian plains lies a city that turned homeownership into something radical, shared, adaptable, and endlessly renewable. Çatalhöyük's residents 9,000 years ago didn't just build houses. They crafted a living system where every home was a cell in a larger organism. Picture a honeycomb of nearly identical rectangular dwellings, each sharing walls with its neighbors, their flat roofs serving as communal pathways. No streets cut through this urban tapestry. Instead, people moved across rooftops, descending into their homes through openings in the ceiling. This wasn't some primitive huddle for survival. It was a deliberate design philosophy that made housing as flexible as Lego blocks. What made these structures revolutionary was their modularity. When a family grew, they didn't need to move or demolish walls. They simply added another standardized room onto their existing home, using the same mud brick and timber techniques. If a dwelling became damaged or outdated, its clay walls could be recycled into new construction, while the foundation, often just compacted earth, allowed for easy rebuilding. The entire city functioned like a living document, constantly edited and revised by its inhabitants. Compare that to today's rigid subdivisions, where knocking down a wall might require permits, engineers, and a small fortune. Çatalhöyük's builders understood something we've forgotten, that homes should serve lives, not the other way around. The social implications were profound. With nearly identical floor plans and shared construction techniques, wealth disparities barely registered in the archaeological record. No palaces towered over hovels here, just a continuous fabric of equitable space. Even the artwork tells this story. Vibrant murals decorated nearly every home, suggesting creative expression wasn't reserved for elites. This egalitarianism extended to urban maintenance too. With roofs as streets, everyone had a vested interest in keeping them intact, a literal case of the commons being cared for by all. Modern architects studying Çatalhöyük have spotted eerie parallels with today's tiny house movement and co-housing experiments. The Neolithic city's interconnected dwellings functioned much like contemporary pocket neighborhoods, where private spaces cluster around shared resources. But here's the twist. Çatalhöyük achieved this without zoning laws or homeowner associations, just collective common sense. Researchers even found evidence of shared toolkits passed between households, hinting at a culture where DIY home improvements were a community affair rather than a competitive industry. So why did we trade this flexibility for McMansions on cookie-cutter lots? Partly, it's about land ownership. Çatalhöyük's residents likely viewed space as collectively stewarded rather than individually owned. But there's also a deeper shift in how we view permanence. Modern construction favors materials like concrete and steel that resist change, while Çatalhöyük embraced impermanence as a feature, not a flaw. Their buildings were designed to evolve, with layers of flooring showing how rooms transformed over generations. Some forward-thinking projects are reviving this mindset. In Amsterdam, the De Flat retrofit turned a rigid 1960s apartment block into a modular system where walls can shift as families change. Tokyo's Room housing cooperative lets residents reconfigure layouts seasonally using sliding partitions. These innovations hint at a future where homes might once again breathe and bend with the lives inside them, just like those ancient mud brick cells that stood not as monuments, but as living, growing companions to their inhabitants. Çatalhöyük's legacy whispers a question. What if the best homes aren't the ones that last forever, but the ones that adapt with us? Along the rugged coasts of medieval Brittany and Cornwall, where Atlantic tides surge with the reliability of a heartbeat, entire villages ran on the pulse of the ocean. Long before the first wind turbine spun or solar panel gleamed, tidal mills harnessed the moon's gravitational pull to grind grain, saw timber, and even forge metal, all without burning a single lump of coal. Picture massive wooden water wheels anchored in estuary channels, their paddles turning first one way, then the other as the tides ebbed and flowed. These weren't just clever contraptions, they were power plants built on nature's schedule, generating energy twice a day with near mathematical precision. The engineering behind these mills was deceptively simple yet brilliant. Builders constructed dams across tidal basins, creating reservoirs that filled as the tide rose. When the water reached its peak, gates slammed shut, trapping seawater behind the barrier. As the tide receded, the trapped water was released through narrow channels where it spun the mill wheels with tremendous force. Some designs even used a dual system, one set of wheels for the incoming tide, another for the outgoing, doubling their productivity. Unlike wind or rivers, which could be fickle, the tides were utterly predictable. Villagers knew down to the minute when the mills would hum to life, synchronizing their work rhythms with the lunar cycle itself. What's astonishing is how widespread this technology became. From the Venetian lagoon to the fjords of Norway, over 300 tidal mills dotted Europe's coastlines by the 12th century. The Domesday Book records one in Dover that powered a fulling mill for wool production, while in Normandy, the Abbey of Mont Saint-Michel operated a tidal mill so efficient it supplied flour to the entire monastic community. These weren't quaint experiments, they were the backbone of local economies running for centuries with minimal maintenance. The materials were locally sourced, timber from nearby forests, stones from coastal cliffs, and seals made of wool and tar that swelled watertight when wet. So why did these marvels vanish from our shores? The Industrial Revolution shifted priorities toward centralized power. Coal-fired steam mills could operate anywhere, anytime, unconstrained by tidal schedules. Yet this progress came with hidden costs. Tidal mills produced zero emissions and required no fuel beyond the moon's eternal tug. Their environmental impact was negligible. Fish could swim around the wheels, and sediment flows remained largely undisturbed. Compare that to modern tidal barrages, which often disrupt delicate coastal ecosystems with concrete barriers. The medieval approach worked with the shoreline's natural rhythms rather than against them. Today, as we search for sustainable energy solutions, engineers are rediscovering these ancient designs with a modern twist. In Cornwall, a revived tidal mill now generates electricity using the same principles as its medieval ancestor, but with lightweight composite materials and precision gearing. Dutch architects have proposed floating tidal mills that rise and fall with sea levels, a necessity in our era of climate change. Even the concept of energy storage isn't new. Medieval millers simply timed their grinding to the tides, storing grain to process during peak flow. The deeper lesson here isn't about nostalgia for wooden wheels. It's about rethinking our relationship with energy as a conversation rather than a conquest. Those medieval builders didn't see the tides as a resource to dominate, but as a partner to collaborate with. Their mills stood not just as machines, but as monuments to patience, reminders that true sustainability means aligning our needs with nature's immutable cadences. As rising sea levels threaten coastal cities worldwide, that ancient wisdom might be the most timely innovation of all. Step into a Pompeian neighborhood before that fateful eruption, and you'd catch the scent of something unexpected. Not 100 individual meals cooking behind closed doors, but the communal aroma of bread baking in shared ovens. These weren't just bakeries, they were the beating heart of daily life, where families brought their dough to be transformed into loaves by skilled bakers in massive wood-fired ovens. The system was remarkably efficient. One well-insulated oven could bake bread for dozens of households, using far less fuel than if each home maintained its own kitchen fire. The math is startling. A single communal oven might consume just 20% of the total wood needed if every residence baked independently. But the brilliance went beyond thermodynamics. These bakeries doubled as social hubs where neighbors exchanged news, merchants negotiated deals, and children learned recipes passed down through generations. The brick ovens themselves were engineering marvels, designed with arched interiors that circulated heat evenly and retained warmth for hours after firing. Some even had dual chambers, one for bread, another for roasting meats or drying fruits, maximizing every ember's potential. Archaeologists have found over 30 such bakeries in Pompeii's ruins, each serving clusters of homes in a walkable radius. This wasn't austerity, it was a deliberate choice to prioritize community over convenience. Compare that to today's suburban landscapes, where identical houses each contain identical appliances, ovens humming empty for hours, dishwashers running half full, dryers puffing heat into garages. The average American home has 3 times more cooking capacity than a Pompeian insula, yet surveys show modern ovens sit idle 95% of the time. The energy waste is staggering. If just 10 neighboring households shared one high-efficiency oven instead of maintaining 10 underused ones, they could slash their collective carbon footprint by nearly 800 pounds annually. So why did we abandon this model? The 20th century's cult of individualism turned private appliances into status symbols, while zoning laws often prohibit mixed residential commercial spaces where shared kitchens might thrive. But cracks are appearing in this paradigm. From Berlin's kitchen cooperatives, where neighbors share high-end appliances, to Brooklyn's communal baking clubs reviving artisanal techniques, people are rediscovering the social and environmental perks of shared resources. Even commercial ventures like cloud kitchens, centralized cooking spaces for meal delivery, echo Pompeii's efficiency, proving that consolidation doesn't mean compromise. The deeper lesson from those ash-preserved bakeries isn't about reverting to some rustic ideal. It's about reimagining how shared infrastructure can create both sustainability and solidarity. Imagine apartment complexes with professional-grade communal kitchens where residents reserve slots like gym times, or suburban cooking co-ops where weekly meal prep becomes a social event. The Pompeians knew something we're relearning. That efficiency isn't just measured in kilowatts saved, but in connections forged over rising dough and the collective warmth of a hearth that belongs to everyone. Beneath the sprawling temple complexes of Angkor, hidden from the eyes of awestruck visitors, lies an engineering marvel that kept the city's gardens lush through both monsoons and droughts, a self-watering landscape so advanced it functioned like a living organism. The Khmer Empire's engineers didn't just build parks, they choreographed an intricate ballet of water, soil, and gravity that nurtured plants without human hands ever lifting a bucket. Picture vast ornamental lakes connected to a clandestine network of laterite channels, their porous walls seeping moisture like capillaries feeding roots. During rainy seasons, excess water filtered through these underground arteries, stored in reservoirs carved beneath walkways. When the dry months came, the same channels reversed their flow, drawing stored water upward through capillary action, delivering it precisely where needed. No pumps, no timers, just pure hydrological genius. The sophistication of this system becomes clear when you examine its components. Each garden bed sat slightly elevated above interconnected channels, creating a gentle slope that encouraged water movement without erosion. Soil mixes were tailored to specific plants, sandier near water-loving species to enhance drainage, denser around drought-tolerant varieties to retain moisture. Even the famous Barre reservoirs played a role. Their massive stone embankments weren't just for show, they stabilized groundwater levels across the entire city, ensuring these self-irrigating gardens had a constant water table to draw from. Modern analysis reveals the Khmer's achieved something staggering. Their parks used 60% less water than conventional irrigation while supporting twice the plant diversity. Compare this to today's water-guzzling urban lawns, where sprinklers dump thousands of gallons on non-native grass only to see half evaporate under the sun. Angkor's engineers would have balked at such wastefulness. Their system mimicked natural watersheds, where every drop served multiple purposes, nourishing plants, cooling walkways, even supporting fish ponds that fertilized the soil. The parallel to contemporary permaculture is uncanny. Both prioritize closed-loop systems where outputs become inputs. But here's the humbling part. The Khmer's accomplished this in the 12th century, using nothing more than hand-cut stone and an intimate understanding of hydrology. So how might we adapt these ancient principles today? Singapore's Gardens by the Bay offers one answer, with biofiltration channels inspired by Angkor's capillary networks. In Arizona, xeriscaping projects use buried clay pots, ancient Ollars technology, to replicate that slow, targeted seeping effect. Even simple tweaks matter. Replacing impermeable concrete walkways with porous materials allows rainwater to recharge groundwater, just as those laterite channels did. The real breakthrough, though, lies in shifting our mindset from seeing irrigation as an active process requiring energy and control to designing landscapes that water themselves through passive physics. The genius of Angkor's parks wasn't just in their efficiency, but in their resilience. When monsoons pounded the city, the system absorbed floods without washing away topsoil. During droughts, it rationed reserves like a careful steward. Modern climate-proofing efforts could learn much from this balance. Imagine urban parks where stormwater becomes a resource rather than a hazard, where plants thrive without complex timers or thirsty sprinkler heads. The KHMers didn't fight nature's unpredictability. They designed around it, creating gardens that flourished no matter what the skies delivered. As rising temperatures and erratic rainfall test our city's adaptability, that ancient wisdom feels less like history and more like a survival manual written in stone and soil. While modern Tokyo dazzles with neon and technology, its ancestor Edo thrived with a system so pragmatic it turned what we flush away into black gold. In the bustling streets of 17th century Japan, the night soil collectors weren't just sanitation workers, they were vital cogs in an elaborate agricultural economy. Every morning before dawn, these specialized laborers emptied household waste containers into wooden barrels, transporting the contents not to rivers or landfills, but to nearby farms where farmers eagerly paid for the nutrient-rich fertilizer. This wasn't some haphazard trade. It was a highly organized circular economy with set prices, designated collection routes, and even quality grading systems. Premium waste from wealthier neighborhoods with better diets fetched higher prices. The system's elegance lay in its closed-loop design. Human waste, instead of polluting waterways as in contemporary European cities, became the lifeblood of Edo's astonishing agricultural productivity. Rice paddies fertilized with night soil yielded harvests up to 50% larger than those relying on animal manure alone. The city's waste became the countryside's bounty, which in turn fed the city again, a perfect cycle that continued for over 250 years. Even the shogunate recognized its value, regulating collection rights and resolving disputes between competing waste guilds. Modern soil scientists confirm what Edo's farmers knew instinctively. Human waste contains nearly all the essential nutrients plants need in nearly perfect proportions. So how did this brilliant system vanish? The Meiji restorations rushed to modernize imported Western sanitation models that viewed human waste as hazardous rather than valuable. Flush toilets, introduced as symbols of progress, severed the nutrient cycle by mixing waste with water and dumping it into Tokyo Bay. The consequences were twofold. Farms lost their primary fertilizer source, forcing dependence on imported chemicals, while untreated sewage created algal blooms that choked waterways. What was once a self-sustaining loop became two separate problems: agricultural shortages and water pollution requiring energy-intensive solutions. The contrast with modern waste treatment is stark. Today's sewage plants spend millions separating and incinerating solids that Edo would have considered precious resources. Meanwhile, chemical fertilizers derived from fossil fuels have depleted soils and created dead zones in oceans. Some forward-thinking cities are now circling back to Edo's wisdom. In Sweden, urine-diverting toilets supply phosphorus to organic farms. Nairobi's slums have revived container-based sanitation, mimicking Edo's collection systems. Even high-tech solutions like hydrothermal carbonization essentially recreate what Edo achieved with barrels and barges, converting human waste into safe, nutrient-dense soil amendments. Beyond its practical benefits, Edo's system embodied a profound cultural attitude that nothing in nature is truly waste, only misplaced resources. The night soil collectors weren't stigmatized. They held respected positions, their work celebrated in woodblock prints and festivals. This mindset might be the hardest thing to revive in our era of disposable everything. As climate change forces reckoning with finite resources, those barrels carried through Edo's twilight streets offer more than historical curiosity. They carry a challenge. Why engineer elaborate systems to destroy what nature designed to be reused? The answer, like the collector's precious cargo, is waiting to be reclaimed. Along the bustling waterways of Kaifeng, the Song dynasty's thriving capital, bridges didn't just connect land, they danced with the rhythms of city life. Imagine a span that could vanish at noon to let towering grain barges pass, then reappear by dusk for night markets to spill across its planks. These weren't static structures of stone and timber, but dynamic instruments of urban flow, their sections retracting like clockwork to adapt to commerce, weather, and even security needs. The genius lay in their multifunctionality. During monsoon season, entire bridge segments could be withdrawn to prevent debris buildup, reducing flood risks downstream. At the first sign of invasion rumors, watchmen could isolate neighborhoods by lifting key crossings, transforming the city's layout as swiftly as sliding chess pieces. The mechanics behind these movable bridges reveal a harmony of simplicity and innovation. Counterweighted with precisely balanced stone weights, their wooden decks pivoted on iron-reinforced axles, operated by teams of just 2 or 3 workers. Some designs used floating pontoons that could be detached and towed aside during high water, while others featured rotating platforms that swung parallel to the shore. The true brilliance, though, was in their scheduling. Like a well-choreographed opera, each bridge's movements followed strict timetables synchronized with tidal patterns, market hours, and ceremonial processions. A merchant arriving at the wrong moment might find his path literally folded away, a gentle nudge toward punctuality that modern traffic lights could never match. Compare this to today's rigid infrastructure. Modern bridges, once built, lock cities into fixed patterns for decades. When a flash flood overwhelms drainage systems or a shipping container outgrows a canal's clearance, the solutions are reactive. Expensive dredging, disruptive detours, or worse, catastrophic failures. The Song engineers flipped this paradigm, creating structures that anticipated change rather than resisted it. Their bridges were more than crossings, they were urban shock absorbers, flexing to accommodate both the predictable and the unforeseen. Contemporary cities are waking up to this ancient wisdom. In London, engineers have proposed retractable extensions for the Thames barrier to handle rising sea levels. Rotterdam's floating pavilions draw direct inspiration from Song pontoon bridges, adapting to water level fluctuations that would cripple fixed structures. Even temporary pedestrian bridges at music festivals now employ modular designs eerily similar to Kaifeng's market-spanning versions. The lesson isn't about recreating medieval mechanisms, it's about embracing infrastructure that listens. The Song dynasty's bridges whisper a provocative question. Why should our cities be frozen in concrete when life never stands still? In an era of climate volatility and rapid urbanization, their greatest innovation wasn't the wood or iron they used, but the philosophy behind it. That true resilience doesn't come from brute strength, but from graceful adaptation. As rising waters test our coastlines and rush hours choke our streets, those vanished bridges across time offer a blueprint, built not for the world as it is, but for the world as it changes. Cordoba's cobbled streets hold a secret most winter cities have forgotten the power of stones that remember the sun. While modern pavements turn to icy death traps after sunset, these 10th century Spanish engineers crafted walkways that literally radiated comfort. The trick was in their choice of dark, volcanic basalt stones, carefully laid with just enough spacing to maximize surface area. All day, these stones soaked up sunlight like sponges, storing thermal energy in their dense cores. Then, as evening temperatures plummeted, they released that warmth gradually, not enough to melt snow instantly, but sufficient to prevent dangerous ice sheets from forming. The effect was subtle but transformative, streets that stayed several degrees warmer than the surrounding air, reducing slips and falls while eliminating the need for salt or shoveling. This wasn't just about material selection, it was urban design as climate adaptation. Cordoba's planners oriented key streets to align with winter sun angles, ensuring maximum solar exposure during short December days. Narrow alleys funneled cold winds overhead while the stones below held their heat, creating microclimates where citrus trees could thrive in a region prone to frost. Even the stone's rounded shapes played a role. Their smooth surfaces allowed snow to slide off more easily than flat concrete would. The system worked so well that records show injuries from winter falls were remarkably rare in medieval Cordoba, despite the lack of modern snow removal. Compare this to today's winter cities, where asphalt's poor thermal retention creates vicious cycles. Dark pavement absorbs some heat by day but loses it quickly, requiring energy-intensive snowplows and chemical de-icers that corrode infrastructure and pollute waterways. Some Nordic towns now experiment with hydronic heating, pumping warm water through pipes beneath sidewalks, but Cordoba achieved similar results without a single watt of electricity. Their approach mimicked nature's own heating strategies, like how dark basalt cliffs in cold climates retain warmth long after sunset. So why haven't snowy cities embraced this ancient wisdom? Partly because modern engineering prioritizes uniformity. Asphalt is cheap and fast to lay, while sourcing and shaping volcanic stone requires craftsmanship. There's also a perception gap. We assume medieval solutions must be primitive, ignoring their sophisticated understanding of local materials, but the tide may be turning. In Ottawa, test sections of dark quartzite pavement have reduced ice accumulation by 40%. Japanese researchers are developing solar storing concrete mixes infused with phase change materials that mimic basalt's thermal properties. Even traditional snow countries like Norway are revisiting cobblestone plazas, not for nostalgia, but because their self-regulating warmth cuts maintenance costs. The deeper lesson from Cordoba's streets isn't about copying medieval stonework. It's about rethinking how cities can work with seasonal rhythms rather than against them. Every winter, we deploy armies of plows and dump tons of salt, treating cold as an enemy to be conquered. Those Spanish engineers saw it differently. Winter wasn't a problem to solve, but a condition to harmonize with. Their streets didn't fight the cold, they simply remembered the sun, offering back its warmth when it was needed most. As climate change makes winters more erratic, that kind of graceful adaptation might be the most modern idea of all. High on the stone-walled plateaus of southern Africa, the rulers of Great Zimbabwe engineered a revolutionary idea: that no harvest should ever rot in private storehouses while others starved. Their solution, a network of massive communal granaries strategically placed throughout the city and its surrounding villages, where surplus crops were collected, protected, and redistributed according to need. These weren't just storage pits, they were the heartbeat of a society that viewed food security as collective responsibility rather than individual luck. Imagine towering cylindrical silos built from stone and clay, their thick walls regulating temperature and humidity to preserve grains for years, their locations carefully chosen to be equally accessible to all neighborhoods. The system's brilliance lay in its dual safeguards against both scarcity and greed. In plentiful years, every farmer contributed a portion of their surplus to the communal stores. During droughts or locust swarms, common threats in this region, the reserves were opened first to families with children and elders, then to all citizens at fair, fixed rates that prevented hoarding. Archaeologists have found evidence of meticulous record-keeping, clay tokens tracking deposits and withdrawals, ensuring transparency. This wasn't charity. It was a sophisticated social contract where contributing to the granaries brought prestige, while attempting to bypass them meant losing communal trust. Compare this to modern cities where food reserves often exist as scattered corporate stockpiles or underfunded food banks. When crises hit, prices spike and the poorest face empty shelves, a scenario Great Zimbabwe avoided for over 3 centuries. Their granaries created a buffer against market shocks, absorbing fluctuations that would devastate vulnerable populations today. Even the architecture served multiple purposes. The largest silos doubled as community gathering spaces, their cool interiors offering respite from the heat, subtly reinforcing the connection between shared resources and shared well-being. What's startling is how these ancient stores outperformed many contemporary systems. Modern grain storage loses up to 30% to pests and spoilage, but Zimbabwe's clay-lined silos, elevated to deter rodents and ventilated to prevent mold, kept losses below 10%. Their location near natural termite mounds provided an unexpected advantage. The insects below ground tunnels acted as passive climate control, maintaining ideal humidity levels year-round. This wasn't just storage, it was biomimicry avant la lettre. So how might cities adapt this model today? Some are already trying. Barcelona's cooperative food networks operate neighborhood grain banks where members trade labor for access. Vermont's statewide food reserve system mirrors Zimbabwe's decentralized approach, with small hubs rather than one massive warehouse. Even high-tech solutions like blockchain are being tested to recreate that ancient transparency, digitizing what clay tokens once achieved. The real breakthrough, though, isn't technical but philosophical. Great Zimbabwe's granaries worked because citizens saw them as extensions of their own pantries, not government handouts. The deeper lesson from those stone silos isn't about recreating medieval infrastructure, it's about redefining what resilience means. In an era of climate-driven crop failures and speculative food markets, their most radical innovation wasn't the granaries themselves, but the collective mindset that filled them. A city's true strength, they proved, isn't measured by how much the wealthy can stockpile, but by how securely the last child is fed. As empty shipping containers pile up in ports while breadlines grow, that ancient African wisdom echoes across 8 centuries. Hunger isn't inevitable, it's a design flaw. Picture a city where the morning commute wasn't bumper-to-bumper traffic, but a lively waterway buzzing with canoes, each laden with fresh produce, handcrafted textiles, and steaming tortillas. This was Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, where commerce didn't clog streets but floated effortlessly along canals, turning every waterway into a dynamic marketplace. Unlike today's delivery trucks idling in gridlock, the Aztecs moved goods silently and cleanly, their shallow-bottomed canoes gliding between neighborhoods with barely a ripple. The system was so efficient that Spanish conquistadors marveled at markets larger than Rome's, where thousands of transactions happened daily without a single paved road. The secret to this aquatic trade network lay in its symbiotic design. Canals weren't just transportation routes, they were multi-purpose lifelines. By day, they hosted floating markets where farmers from Chinampa's artificial islands sold corn and squash directly from their boats. At night, these same waterways transformed into cooling systems, their evaporation moderating the city's microclimate. Pollution was virtually non-existent. Any organic waste that fell into the water became fish food or fertilizer, completing a closed-loop system modern cities still struggle to replicate. Even the boats themselves were sustainable, dug from local cedar and waterproofed with natural resins. They lasted decades without a single scrap of plastic or metal. Contrast this with contemporary waterfront cities that treat rivers and canals as decorative afterthoughts. In Tenochtitlan, water was infrastructure, as vital as roads or power lines are today. Goods traveled shorter distances since markets moved to the people, not the other way around. A single canoe could supply an entire neighborhood with everything from pottery to medicinal herbs, eliminating the need for big box stores and their carbon-spewing supply chains. The Aztecs even had designated loading zones where boats could pull aside for transactions without disrupting traffic flow, a concept modern cities are only now rediscovering with bike lanes and pedestrian plazas. The environmental benefits were staggering. Without diesel engines or asphalt, the city's air stayed clear, and stormwater drained naturally into the canal system instead of overwhelming sewers. Noise pollution was minimal, just the dip of paddles and the hum of barter. Modern studies show that water transport emits up to 5 times less CO2 per ton of cargo than trucks, making Tenochtitlan's model eerily prescient in an age of climate consciousness. So why don't we see floating markets in today's waterfront metropolises? Partly because industrial era planning prioritized cars over boats, filling in canals for roads. But glimpses of revival exist. Bangkok's remaining floating markets now draw tourists, but also serve practical roles for riverside communities. Amsterdam's Waterpleinen, water plazas host seasonal floating markets, proving the concept still works in wealthy, modern cities. Even landlocked urban areas are experimenting with pop-up canal markets along revitalized waterways like Chicago's Riverwalk vendors. The Aztecs' real innovation wasn't the boats or the canals, it was treating commerce as a fluid, adaptive system. Their markets could expand during harvest seasons, shift routes around construction, and even float emergency supplies to flooded areas. In an era of rising sea levels and choked streets, that flexibility isn't just nostalgic, it's strategic. Imagine a future where Amazon deliveries glide silently up your neighborhood canal, where morning coffee comes from a barge-turned cafe, where food waste becomes fish feed instead of landfill methane. Tenochtitlan's waterways whisper a radical truth. Sometimes the most cutting-edge solutions aren't about inventing new technologies, but remembering old ones. In the marble-lined courtyards of ancient Helaik, where philosophers once debated beneath the shade of olive trees, a peculiar fountain held the city's attention not for its beauty, but for its silence. When its steady stream suddenly ceased, citizens knew to brace themselves, for the earth would soon tremble. This wasn't magic, it was meticulous engineering. Greek hydrologists had designed these fountains with hidden underground chambers connected to delicate clay pipes. Under normal conditions, water pressure kept the flow constant, but even the slightest seismic shift would misalign these pipes, cutting off the supply instantly. The fountain's silence became nature's telegram, delivering warnings minutes before tremors arrived, a head start that often meant the difference between life and death. What makes these ancient sensors remarkable is their elegant simplicity. Unlike modern seismographs that require electricity and interpretation, Helaik's fountain communicated in a language everyone understood: absence. The system leveraged basic physics. Water always seeks the path of least resistance, so when earthquakes subtly fractured or tilted underground channels, the flow rerouted naturally. Some fountains even had tiered designs. The upper basin would stop first, giving a preliminary alert, while the lower levels continued until stronger tremors hit, effectively acting as a rudimentary intensity gauge. Archaeologists have found similar systems in at least 7 Greek cities, suggesting this was a widespread early warning network rather than a local curiosity. Compare this to today's disaster preparedness, where billion-dollar satellite systems and smartphone alerts often fail to reach vulnerable populations in time. The 2011 Tohoku earthquake in Japan showed how high-tech systems can be overwhelmed. Tsunami warnings arrived too late for many coastal communities. Meanwhile, a humble fountain requires no batteries, no internet, and no literacy to interpret. Its signal is universal. Modern engineers are now revisiting this concept with surprising twists. In Chile, researchers have installed seismic faucets in schools, modified versions of helix design that shut off gas and water lines automatically during quakes. Istanbul's earthquake early warning system includes public fountains that flash LED lights when tremors are detected offshore, merging ancient and modern signaling. The deeper genius of these Greek fountains lies in their passive reliability. They needed no committee to activate them, no maintenance beyond occasional cleaning. They worked precisely because they were integrated into daily life. People noticed their rhythms just as we notice traffic lights. This points to a gap in contemporary disaster planning. Our most advanced systems often exist outside the rhythms of community. Sirens blare, phones buzz, but how many truly register these alerts amid the noise of modern life? A fountain's silence, by contrast, was conspicuous. It didn't just warn, it made people pause, look, and act. Imagine applying this principle today. What if every fire hydrant had a tremor-sensitive valve that released red dye into the water during seismic activity, creating visible streaks in rivers or taps? Or if bridges were painted with special coatings that cracked in telltale patterns under stress? The Greeks understood that effective warnings must be woven into the environment itself, not just added as afterthoughts. Their fountains didn't fight nature's unpredictability. They translated its language into something human, scale, and actionable. As cities today face not just earthquakes but floods, wildfires, and rising seas, Helix's legacy offers a provocative alternative to our tech-heavy approach. Sometimes the most life-saving technology isn't the most complex, it's the one that turns everyday observation into instinctive reaction. Those silent fountains stand as reminders that resilience isn't just about detecting disasters faster. It's about ensuring everyone, from scholars to street vendors, understands the message without needing an instruction manual. In our rush to build smarter cities, we might have forgotten a simple truth. The best warning system is the one that needs no explanation. On the sun-baked rooftops of ancient Thebes, amid the rustling papyrus and the scent of blooming lotus flowers, Egyptians practiced a form of urban agriculture that modern cities are only beginning to rediscover: beekeeping as civic infrastructure. These weren't just a few scattered hives. Entire neighborhoods maintained rooftop apiaries, their bees buzzing between temple gardens, riverside orchards, and the flowering herbs that grew in terracotta pots on every balcony. The hives themselves were masterpieces of adaptive design, cylindrical structures made from Nile mud and straw, their interiors precisely regulated to stay cool in scorching summers and warm during brief winter chills. Beekeepers monitored them with an almost sacred reverence, knowing these insects were the unseen engineers of their food supply. The scale of this symbiotic relationship was staggering. Temple records from the New Kingdom detail how priestesses of Hathor, the goddess of nourishment, managed apiaries that produced over 6 tons of honey annually, not just for sweetening food, but for medicine, religious offerings, and even preserving mummies. Yet the real value wasn't in the honey harvest. It was in the pollination services these bees provided. Date palms, figs, and pomegranates all thrived because rooftop bees ensured their flowers bore fruit. Even the famed papyrus swamps benefited, as bees cross-pollinated wetland plants that stabilized the Nile's banks. This wasn't just beekeeping, it was an entire ecosystem service woven into the urban fabric. Fast forward to today, where many cities treat bees as nuisances rather than allies. Zoning laws often ban hives outright, while manicured lawns and pesticide-laden parks offer little sustenance for pollinators. The consequences are stark. Over the past 50 years, global insect populations have plummeted by nearly 75%, with bees among the hardest hit. Modern agriculture relies on trucking in commercial hives to pollinate crops, a brittle system that collapses when bees die en masse from colony collapse disorder. The Egyptians, by contrast, decentralized pollination by making every neighborhood a haven for bees, creating resilience through diversity. But glimmers of change are emerging. Paris, once an unlikely candidate for urban beekeeping, now hosts over 1,000 hives on rooftops from the Opéra Garnier to apartment buildings in Montmartre. Their honey, tested annually, shows lower pesticide levels than rural counterparts, a proof that cities can be sanctuaries when designed thoughtfully. Toronto's Green Roof bylaw mandates pollinator-friendly plants on new buildings, while Melbourne trains residents to become bee-friendly landlords by planting native species on balconies. These initiatives echo ancient wisdom: when you feed bees, you feed a city. The deeper lesson from Egypt's rooftop apiaries isn't about nostalgia for mud hives. It's about recognizing that cities aren't separate from nature, they're nodes within it. Bees don't need wilderness to thrive, they need corridors of flowers and safe nesting sites, things even dense urban areas can provide. Imagine if every new office tower included flowering green walls, if parking lots sprouted clover instead of sterile gravel, if schoolyards taught kids to identify native plants that sustain local pollinators. The Egyptians didn't just keep bees, they cultivated kinship with them, understanding that the hum of wings overhead wasn't just background noise, it was the sound of a functioning city. As climate change destabilizes global food systems, those rooftop hives whisper a challenge. Why outsource pollination to industrial farms when every balcony could be part of the solution? The Egyptians didn't have the science of ecosystem services, but they grasped the principle intuitively that a city's health is measured not just in its monuments, but in the vitality of its smallest, busiest residents. Walking through medieval Bruges, you wouldn't find sleepy suburbs or sterile business districts instead. Every street pulsed with life, where the clang of a blacksmith's hammer blended with children's laughter, and the scent of fresh baked bread drifted from a home kitchen doubling as a bakery. This wasn't urban chaos, it was deliberate design. The city's mixed-use zoning meant cobblestone lanes housed leather workers above their shops, weavers spinning wool next to bustling taverns, and merchants counting coins in rooms overlooking canals. Commutes were measured in footsteps, not traffic jams, because work and life weren't compartmentalized. They coexisted in a seamless dance. The brilliance of this layout lay in its efficiency. Without zoning laws dictating where people could live or work, artisans clustered by trade organically, creating districts where competition spurred innovation while camaraderie fostered mentorship. A young apprentice could wake above his master's workshop, dash downstairs to stoke the forge, and spend evenings learning techniques from neighboring craftsmen, all without crossing a single bridge. Streets stayed active at all hours, shopkeepers kept eyes on children playing outside, and night watchmen knew every resident by name. This wasn't just convenience, it was community woven into the city's very blueprint. Compare this to modern urban sprawl, where zoning laws often mandate strict separation between homes, offices, and shops. The result, desolate downtowns after dark, suburbs requiring cars for milk runs, and commuters wasting years of their lives in transit. Bruges thrived because its design respected human rhythms. Parents could pop home for lunch, deliveries happened on foot, and elderly residents weren't isolated in residential ghettos. Even the architecture reflected this harmony. Steep staircases tucked behind storefronts led to sunlit living quarters, while ground-floor arcades sheltered both customers and casual passers-by from rain. But Bruges' real innovation was social. When workspaces and homes share walls, economic disparities become harder to ignore and harder to sustain. A master goldsmith living above his shop couldn't hoard wealth while his journeymen struggled. Their fates were visibly intertwined. This proximity bred a culture of mutual aid, where guilds functioned as both trade unions and neighborhood associations. Festivals spilled into shared courtyards, and disputes were settled over shared ale rather than courtroom battles. The city's famous beguinages, communal housing for single women, epitomized this ethos, blending living quarters, workshops, and chapels into self-sufficient micro-communities. So why did we abandon this model? The Industrial Revolution reshaped cities around factories, segregating dirty workplaces from pure homes, a division later codified by zoning laws favoring cars over pedestrians. Yet today, as remote work blurs these boundaries, some cities are resurrecting medieval wisdom. Amsterdam's 15-minute city plan ensures schools, clinics, and groceries sit within a quarter-hour walk of every home. Tokyo's Zakayo buildings stack apartments above noodle shops and law offices, their stairwells buzzing with chance encounters. Even American suburbs are experimenting with live work units that let potters or programmers ditch soul-crushing commutes. The lesson from Bruges isn't about recreating horse-drawn carts or candlelit workshops. It's about recognizing that urban vitality springs from connection, not segregation. When streets are designed for people rather than zoning categories, they become stages for spontaneous collaboration, caretaking, and celebration. Those Flemish alleys where the clatter of looms mingled with dinner table chatter whisper a radical truth: the best cities aren't just places we inhabit. They're places where living, working, and belonging happen in the same breath. High in Peru's coastal desert, where rain might not fall for years, the ancient Chimu people didn't wait for storms. They pulled water straight from the air. Their capital, Chan Chan, thrived under relentless sun thanks to towering fog catchers, vast nets woven from resilient cactus fibers, stretched across wooden frames to intercept ocean mists rolling inland. These weren't passive collectors. They were precision instruments angled to maximize contact with moisture-laden winds, their intricate mesh mimicking the way desert beetles condense fog droplets on their shells. Morning after morning, beads of water formed along the fibers, trickling down into ceramic channels that fed reservoirs holding thousands of gallons, all without a single well or aqueduct. The sophistication of this system becomes clear when you examine its components. The Chimu didn't just hang any old nets. They selected specific cactus species whose fibers absorbed moisture while resisting rot. They positioned collectors along ridges where fog density peaked, often building stone terraces to elevate them into ideal wind currents. Even the spacing between fibers was calibrated too tight, and airflow would be blocked, too loose, and droplets wouldn't coalesce. Modern engineers testing reconstructions found these ancient nets achieved 60% efficiency comparable to many synthetic meshes used today. What's astonishing is how this 1,000-year-old solution is experiencing a renaissance. In Lima's arid hill slopes, NGO-installed fog catchers now supply entire neighborhoods with clean water, reducing reliance on expensive tanker trucks. Chilean vineyards use them to irrigate drought-stressed grapevines. Even high-tech versions are emerging, some with nano-coated polymers inspired by the original cactus fibers. Yet despite proven success, atmospheric water harvesting remains a niche solution rather than a mainstream practice. The barriers aren't technical but systemic. Modern water infrastructure favors centralized, high-volume solutions like dams and desalination plants, projects with visible ribbon-cutting appeal. Fog catchers work best as distributed networks, their impact cumulative rather than dramatic. There's also a perception hurdle. The idea of mining air seems fantastical to planners raised on concrete and pipe paradigms. Meanwhile, the Chimu understood something we're relearning, that resilience often lies in humble, adaptable systems rather than monumental engineering. Climate change is rewriting the rules. As traditional water sources dwindle, even skeptics are turning to ancient wisdom. In Morocco's anti-Atlas Mountains, revived fog-catching techniques are reversing desertification. California's coastal research stations now monitor fog patterns as potential water budgets. The Chimu's legacy offers more than historical curiosity. It's a challenge to our assumptions about scarcity. When a civilization could flourish in one of Earth's driest regions without drilling a single well, perhaps the real drought isn't in our skies but in our imagination. History rarely discards good ideas without reason, yet the vanishing of these ingenious urban designs wasn't some inevitable march of progress. It was often a collision of forces: industrialization's hunger for standardization, colonial powers dismantling local knowledge, and a growing belief that newer always meant better. Take wind catchers. Those elegant Persian cooling towers worked flawlessly for centuries. But when British colonizers introduced electric fans in the early 20th century, they dismissed traditional architecture as primitive. Overnight, generations of climate-responsive design became relics, replaced by energy-guzzling appliances that locked entire regions into dependency on foreign technology and fragile power grids. The Industrial Revolution accelerated this erosion by prioritizing speed over sustainability. Factories churned out uniform building materials, concrete, steel, glass, that could be slapped together anywhere, regardless of local climate or culture. Ancient techniques like rammed earth or self-cooling courtyards required craftsmanship and patience, two things the new economy had no time for. Profit margins favored quick construction over long-term resilience, trading Mohenjo-Daro's self-cleaning streets for asphalt roads that cracked under heat and required armies of maintenance crews. Even something as simple as mixed-use zoning, the heartbeat of medieval Bruges, was zoned out of existence by 20th-century planners obsessed with separating homes, shops, and factories into inefficient silos. Colonialism played a particularly devastating role. When Spanish conquistadors encountered Tenochtitlan's floating markets, they didn't see a sophisticated aquatic logistics network. They saw something alien to their car-centric worldview and filled in the canals to build roads. Similar fates befell India's stepwells, labeled as unsanitary by British officials who preferred piped water systems that later proved vulnerable to droughts. Indigenous knowledge wasn't just ignored, it was actively suppressed, severing the thread of continuity that had kept these systems functioning for millennia. The result, cities that forgot how to work with their environments, relying instead on brute force technologies to compensate for poor design. Perhaps the most insidious shift was psychological. Ancient cities viewed themselves as part of ecosystems. Petra's water channels mimicked natural watersheds. Kyoto's green corridors honored wildlife migrations. Modern urban planning, by contrast, often treats nature as an obstacle to conquer. We pave over floodplains and wonder why streets drown, install air conditioners instead of designing buildings that breathe, and dump waste into rivers rather than cycling it back into the land like Edo's night soil collectors. This mindset didn't emerge overnight. It was nurtured by a false narrative that equated advanced with disconnected from nature. Yet cracks are appearing in this paradigm. As climate change turns conventional cities into heat traps and flood zones, the wisdom we discarded is gaining urgent relevance. Barcelona's superblocks echo the pedestrian-first ethos of Machu Picchu, while Melbourne's urban canopy initiative revives the shade strategies of Palmyra. The real challenge isn't technological, it's cultural. How do we relearn the patience to build with local materials like Great Zimbabwe's masons? Can we value maintenance as highly as innovation, as the Romans did with their aqueducts? Most crucially, can we shift from seeing ancient solutions as outdated to recognizing them as time-tested blueprints for survival? This isn't about romanticizing the past or rejecting modernity. It's about curating the best of both worlds, pairing 21st-century materials with 2,000-year-old principles of harmony. The wind catchers of Yaz didn't need to disappear when air conditioning arrived. They could have evolved, integrating solar-powered fans or smart sensors to enhance their natural airflow. The same applies to governance. Reviving communal resource-sharing models like Timgad's water fountains doesn't mean abandoning pipes, but ensuring no citizen thirsts when systems fail. The quiet rebellion has already begun. From Mexico City's Chinampa farmers reviving Aztec wetland agriculture to Singapore's architects studying Angkor's self-watering parks, a movement is stitching ancient wisdom into modern urban DNA. What these pioneers understand is simple. The future of cities isn't just about inventing new solutions, it's about remembering the ones that never stopped working. The stones of Shibam, the canals of Tenochtitlan, the granaries of Great Zimbabwe, they're not ruins, they're guideposts waiting for us to rediscover the path they paved. From self-cooling buildings to circular waste systems, these 29 ancient urban designs shatter the myth that sustainability and safety are modern inventions. They're not lost relics of the past, they're blueprints we forgot, buried under layers of concrete and short-term thinking. As today's cities buckle under heat waves, floods, and waste crises, these rediscovered solutions whisper a radical truth. The most cutting-edge urban innovations might be the ones that have weathered centuries. Take the wind catchers of Persia, turning desert breezes into natural air conditioning, or the Aztec canals that moved goods without a single exhaust pipe. These weren't just clever tricks, they were systems born from necessity, refined through generations of observation and adaptation. Unlike our disposable infrastructure, they were built to last, not just to turn a quick profit. The Romans didn't see wastewater as a problem to dump. They saw it as fuel for baths and fertilizer for fields. The Nabateans didn't fight their desert climate. They danced with it, harvesting fog and channeling flash floods into lifelines. Every one of these designs holds a lesson we're desperate to relearn. That resilience isn't about dominating nature, but collaborating with it. So where do we go from here? The answer isn't about bulldozing modern cities to rebuild mud-brick towers. It's about hybrid thinking, pairing ancient wisdom with contemporary materials. Imagine skyscrapers with Shibam's fireproof clay composites, or subway systems as efficient as Tenochtitlan's canoe networks. Picture neighborhoods where every rooftop is a Kyoto-style pollinator habitat, where storm drains mimic Mohenjo-Daro's self-cleaning streets. The solutions are there, etched in stone and sediment, waiting for us to pay attention. This isn't nostalgia, it's survival. As climate change accelerates, cities can't afford to keep repeating the same mistakes. The past isn't a dead end, it's a fork in the road we missed. Which of these forgotten innovations would transform your city? Would it be Petra's water-saving terraces, or Bruges' mixed-use streets that turn commutes into chance encounters? The conversation starts now. Drop your thoughts below, and let's rewrite the future with lessons from the past. And if you're hungry for more stories where history meets tomorrow, hit subscribe. The next chapter of urban life isn't just being written, it's being